You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
The first one of its kind. Thousands of years ago, the Jedi had another civil war that split the Order. It was a terrible thing. A faction among the Jedi abandoned the teachings of the Order, following their own path. They waged war on their fellow Jedi, a war that raged across the galaxy. But these fallen Jedi were cast out, defeated, and they retreated to worlds in the Outer Rim. Over time, they took on the mantle of the Lords of the Sith. But in their hearts, they never forgot the Jedi. The hatred for the Jedi Order burns in their veins like fire and echoes in their teachings. Revan tasted it.
Our story begins in 7000 BBY, during an era called the 100-Year Darkness, which was a brutal civil war among the Jedi. This was the first time Dark Jedi would emerge in an attempt to overthrow an existing Jedi Order, to implement their own version of Force adherence. The war lasted 100 years, and the light side would ultimately win out, but not without a terrible cost of many lives. The number of Dark Jedi, however, would be reduced to only 12 disciples. These were referred to as the Exiles, and would be banned from Republic space. The leader and most powerful among these exiles was the High General, Ajunta Pall. It fell upon Paul to seek out a new homeworld for the Dark Jedi, a promised land, if you will. This new Dark Jedi diaspora would seek out the legend of the Kingdom of the Sith. This was the Sith species, not to be confused with the later Dark Lords of the Sith. They discovered the Sith home planet of Korriban, a world that emanated with dark side energies, making it an ideal rock to colonize. The planet was still occupied by the Sith, however, but its government would be co-opted by the Exiles, who were able to entrench themselves inside the halls of power, setting themselves up for a mutiny, deposing the Dark Magician and Sith King, Hakagram Grouch. The Dark Jedi presented themselves as gods, for indeed, their force power and technology was far beyond what the relatively primitive Sith had experienced. This is where the Dark Lords of the Sith originated. Generation after generation passed, and the mostly human Dark Jedi would interbreed with the Sith, forming a human-Sith hybrid aristocracy that would last for multiple millennia. Though not much is known about Marka Ragnos' early life, it was this aristocracy he was born into, being a human-Sith hybrid himself. One can only assume he was raised in a cultural milieu of Sith royalty and dark side practitioners. It was his ancestors, the Exiles, who were his inspiration to become a powerful Sith leader in honor of their memory, to carry on the 1,000-year-old traditions of the Dark Jedi and expand the first Sith Empire. Ragnos was also a highly skilled warrior and powerful Force user. He commanded respect and admiration from all of his peers. Not only was he a deadly fighter, but he was also a brilliant mind and military strategist, known for being one of the wisest Sith Lords ever to live, a reputation he held long after his death. The Great Duel.
Sometime around 5150 BBY, the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, or Jennari, as the Korabanites referred to them, had died. There is no current historical record of who this Jennari was at the time. Nonetheless, during the time of Marka Ragnos' ascendancy, there was yet another warlord who rivaled him in power and prestige, a Sith magician by the name of Simus. Both were vying to become the new Jennari. Simus was a Sith male and highly competent practitioner of dark arts. He, being Marka Ragnos' only real competitor to the throne, challenged him to a duel to the death, with the victor laying claim to the mantle of the Dark Lord of the Sith. In the ensuing battle, Simus was overcome by the superior fighting skills of Ragnos, and with one swift strike from his sword, Simus was decapitated. This would not be his death blow, however, as he was able to use his sorcery to stave off death, while one of his servants constructed a contraption that maintained his life without a body. Presumably, this device was also enchanted with dark side energy, as was a common practice amongst the Sith. Marka Ragnos had overcome his first major obstacle by winning the fight, and he would now assume the Dark Lord title and become leader of the unified Sith Empire, which would be spoken for a millennia to come. The duel with Simus was not personal, and Ragnos actually had a great deal of respect for the magician, even electing to have him placed on the Sith Council. The bodiless Sith was very loyal and devoted to the cause of his people, and served under Marka for years as a trusted confidant and ally. Simus would ultimately be killed by his own apprentice, Nagasato, many years later.
Ruling and reigning. Ragnos was as cunning as a serpent, and made sure to keep many of those in his Sith council in heated competition with one another, thus keeping them from trying to usurp his throne. He was as wise as he was powerful, and understood that those who were possessed by the dark side of the Force would always lust for power. So pitting the council against one another was an insurance policy on his own life, should one of his inferiors want to dethrone him. Despite the infighting, he was able to expand the Sith Empire, being perhaps the most ambitious Dark Lord to rule up to this point. Ragnos unified the Sith clans and led many campaigns against local enemies in the region of space which they occupied. He was known for being ruthless and showing no mercy, ensuring their enemies' ghosts would never come back to haunt them. This era was known as the Golden Age of the Sith, where the Sith people turned from a primitive world of warlords to a multi-planet empire. Along with their imperialistic ambitions, Marka pushed society into an age of dark side innovations, literature, and art. Many of the relics from the first Sith Empire that have been unearthed are from this period. Ragnos even wrote a lost epistle that was very influential on dark side intellectualism at the time. Unfortunately, its contents have been lost to the annals of history because of the zealous Jedi Inquisitor Celeste Morn, who destroyed the last known copy sometime after 4000 BBY. The Dark Lord's actions during his life would also play an important role, even long after his death. A young Sith pureblood by the name of Tenebrae had lobbied Marka Ragnos to be taken on as an apprentice. Though the king did not accept his request, he was nonetheless impressed by the ambitious upstart. Tenebrae was as powerful as he was sociopathic, personally killing thousands in tribal fighting on his home planet of Medrias by the ripe old age of 10. His sadism was unmatched, torturing his own mother for months before killing her. Ragnos thought that the boy's talents should not be wasted, and knighted him Lord Vitiate, ruler of Medrias, when he was only 13. Vitiate would later develop a dark side technique of absorbing all life energy within a geographical region, which would make him incredibly powerful and prolong his life, possibly indefinitely. He believed that with this power, he would achieve the status of a god. This life-draining ability was honed and mastered millennia later by Darth Nihilus. Many years after Ragnos' death, Darth Vitiate would become the supreme leader of the Sith Empire and expand their reach even further. After about a century of rule, the enigmatic emperor would die peacefully of old age, a rarity among Sith lords that spoke to his leadership and wisdom. His funeral procession was perhaps the most extravagant and widely attended event in the Sith Empire up to that point. Equipment and attire.
Though the Dark Lord would occasionally don a lightsaber, his weapon of choice was his scepter. It was a long metallic staff with two curved horns at the top of it, while the bottom was the hilt of a striated tipped blade sheathed inside of the hollow staff portion. The scepter of Ragnos was imbued with darkside magic. Through the use of sorcery, the Dark Jedi designed the weapon to absorb darkside energy from any given area. This effect was so awesome, it would at times drain an entire locality of its energy. This made the sword incredibly powerful, possibly even with stronger breaking power than a lightsaber, and when fully charged, would easily deflect the strikes of a lightsaber. The blade's feats did not end there. It was even able to protect against force energy attacks like force lightning. Another piece of attire that was personally customized by Ragnos was his gauntlets. They were black and covered with scales. The gauntlets could only be used by those with a strong connection to the dark side, augmenting their power due to the Sith sorcery that imbued them. Many centuries after his death, the legendary Darth Revan recovered the gauntlets from Ragnos' tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban. When he finally did assume the mantle of Dark Lord of the Sith, his kingly attire consisted of a long black robe with a metal emblem laid on his chest, along with metal shoulder pads of the same material. He wore an iconic helmet which protected his head and neck, but left his face exposed. It had two large curved horns which resembled the horns of the scepter of Ragnos. Though not technically equipment per se, the Dark Lord held in his possession a giant Cispawn Terentatek, which he would refer to as his pet, though he viewed the animal as a tool more than anything. Ragnos would conduct cruel experiments on the beast, often beating and torturing it throughout the night in order to increase its hatred and darkside energies. He would feed it only blood for sustenance, making its appetite for raw flesh insatiable. The Terentatek's slave fought for him in many battles and was an invaluable asset in helping him sustain his iron rule. Because the creature was a darkside creation, it was able to live for centuries, even hibernating until awoken by the presence of the Force in order to feed. When Ragnos died, around 5000 BBY, the beast watched over his tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords, only to be awoken and slain by a courageous Sith warrior.
Legacy. Despite his death, the memory of Marka Ragnos lived on. His followers, known as the Ragnosians, were determined to keep his legend alive and to maintain his teachings and ideals. They formed a powerful sect within the Sith, dedicated to preserving the legacy of their fallen leader. In the years following his death, they worked to spread Marka Ragnos' teachings throughout the galaxy. They sought out other Force-sensitive individuals and trained them in the ways of the dark side, all in an effort to keep his legacy alive. They also made sure to keep his tomb and his physical remains safe and guarded as a symbol of their devotion to him. In addition, the Ragnosians also worked to gather artifacts, texts, and items that were related to Marka Ragnos and his reign, to keep them safe and pass them on to the next generations. They believed that these relics would help them to better understand his teachings and to continue to spread his message. During the competition to be his immediate successor, Ragnos appeared before Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh after their duel, and gave them an inspiring speech on the great history of the Sith, and anointing Sadow as the new leader of the Empire. He was able to keep his spirit alive for millennia in the form of a Force ghost, presenting himself before Exar Kun in his tomb, and appearing much later to Darth Plagueis in a vision. In this experience, Ragnos chastised Plagueis for abandoning the ancient traditions of the Sith and refused to answer any of the interlocutor's questions, instead snarling and getting frustrated with him. Plagueis wrote down his recollection of this incident in the Book of Sith, which was later acquired and read by his apprentice, Darth Sidious. During the New Republic era, there was yet another cult of the ancient Dark Lord called the Disciples of Ragnos. They worshipped him as a god. Their sole mission in life was to resurrect their deity using his scepter. The cult was able to gain access to Ragnos' tomb, and his spirit emerged from his sarcophagus to possess the group's leader, Tavion Axmis. His triumphant return would not last long, however, before the Jedi Knight, Jaden Korr, was able to subdue the cultist and banish the Dark Lord back into his tomb. But not before Ragnos would proclaim that he was going to return. This was history's last known encounter with the ancient Sith, though his spirit presumably continues to haunt the halls of the Valley of the Dark Lords.
Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Jordan.
And this is Christian.
We're back on Korriban.
Did we ever even leave?
Well, now we're doing a little bit of ghost hunting.
Do you have your detector all set up?
Yeah. We're doing some seances, we're trying to speak with the dead Lord Marka Ragnos.
That'd be a good guest appearance on an episode.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he wants to make an appearance. I kind of doubt it, but if you hear any weird noises in the background, it's probably him. Anyways, so in this episode, we discuss the ancient Sith Lord, Marka Ragnos. Not much is actually known about him. There's not a whole ton of biography on him. Especially before he becomes the Sith Lord, how he rose to power,
his early life.
Yeah. There's literally nothing. And unless, I'll say this with a caveat, if someone has read
something
in material that I am unaware of, bring it up and send us a message. Let us know. But as far as I was scouring for quite a while, I couldn't really
find anything.
Yeah, find anything substantive. And also another sort of strange aspect of his rise to power is he apparently took over another great Dark Lord of the Sith.
Yeah. Well, yeah, presumably. So the names we know are Agenda Paul, who starts it.
Right.
And then we know thousands of years pass, presumably a bunch of different leaders.
Yeah, yeah.
And then suddenly Marka Ragnos is the next name.
Yeah.
And we don't even know the guy that he took over.
But apparently the guy that he took over from was a great leader as well. But
yeah. We don't even know their name.
Only thing. Yeah, there's no name. There's really nothing.
We don't even know if it's a guy.
Yeah. Maybe it's not. But yeah, it's sort of this black hole in the history of the Sith, which is interesting. Almost doesn't make a lot of sense. I think there could be a lot of if Lucasfilm or Disney ever wanted to go and
offer anything to them.
No, I'm just saying there's a lot of gaps.
There's a blank space there.
Yeah, especially because when the exiles appeared to the Sith, it's they weren't as primitive as a Sith. They had more modern technology. They were had way more expertise in the Force. You would think they would be more about writing down the history and
it's not like you're
events.
A Stone Age culture.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, not that the Sith were technological even before the exiles came, but
but nothing's documented.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just because we don't know doesn't mean it doesn't exist within the canon. Well, not canon.
Yeah,
but within the universe. Obviously, just because the Star Wars timeline just covers so much.
Yeah.
There are, and we're going to encounter these gaps later too. There are these dead zones where there's a story that some author wanted to tell, and then there's a period where there's not a lot of information, and then another character will pop up again and then kind of continue the story. So we have bits and pieces, and it would be a very interesting area to explore. But also you can't really change the dynamic of the galaxy because even up until this point, the Republic still doesn't know the Sith Empire is there.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's telling a story about how much can you do within the Sith Empire that's not repetitive for thousands of years without accidentally bumping into the Republic or the Jedi or messing up with the timelines, right?
Yeah. Though I would say it would be an interesting story to tell if it was just only dark side users and Sith. And who's the protagonist in that story and who's the antagonist, right? That I think that would be kind of an
but how many times can you tell that story over 1,000 period?
Yeah.
You could tell a story or a few stories, but
if I personally would like to see just a couple stories peppered into there and a little more layers of history, even if it's a brief synopsis.
They could also pull the history card and just steal from history, and the Sith Empire has a lot of Egyptian connotations. So I
was actually going to bring this up. Yeah, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, you could just steal the Egyptian Empire was around for thousands of years too, which is also a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Like Canada and the U.S. are barely breaking 200 years,
Yeah.
and you have this civilization that's existed for thousands of years.
Oh yeah, like most like empires like lasted at least 1,000.
Yeah.
Like
We're weak. But anyways, yeah, so you could just like hijack some cool narrative stories of like actual Egyptian pharaohs and kind of like transpose them. I'm sure you could do a lot with magic and vision quests and like
yeah.
force magic.
Yeah. So I was reading from a little bit of sleuthing. George Lucas actually in the 90s, early mid 90s, when like Marka Ragnos is first envisioned by Kevin Anderson and Tom Veitch. They wrote that series of books, and that's like when it's unclear who actually created the character, but he appears first in the Tales of the Jedi comic books in like 96 or something. And apparently Lucas wasn't so happy with all the Egyptian
Oh, really?
allusions, and like Lucasfilm even made them change the initial concept art for his sarcophagus because they said it looked too much like an Egyptian sarcophagus, and so like they were like trying to get the writers to like come up with something a little different. And not be so Egyptian.
Okay, so maybe my idea wouldn't fly,
but absolutely, especially with like the magic and all, like during like what I did find around that time and in like the Tales of the Jedi, there's a lot of like using sorcery to make items become magic. Like that's like a big thing, and that does, it kind of feels like from the, like, I am not an Egyptologist by any stretch, but like from the little bit that I know, that seemed to be like a big thing that they would do. Like items had like magical power, you know, and that was like a kind of a common trope in sort of Egyptian folklore, I guess. But yeah, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. Like maybe like Lucasfilm or George Lucas didn't really want it to be that tied to like a real culture. They wanted to be more creative or something.
Have
but
a little more distance. But
yeah,
at the same time,
yeah, but like that was like even when you get to like the Knights of the Old Republic games and the Valley of the Dark Lords, it's like clearly it's like Egyptian.
Yeah.
And they're doing like archaeology.
the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty on the nose.
Yeah, they're archaeologists are discovering all the, you know, it's very obviously
inspired.
Yeah, inspired by Egypt. Which I don't hate. I think it's kind of
I've always liked like ancient Egypt.
Yeah,
It was
me
one of my
too.
first great fascinations about history.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, you know, I think I did like my first great fascination was like the Greeks.
That came for me later.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I went from like Egypt to Rome to Greece.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got into the Greeks before, but this was like when I was a kid. I just thought they were interesting. But then later, like really, actually the last few years, I've been really into like ancient Mesopotamia.
Me too. I never cared about like
Oh, really?
the Bronze Age. I was just kind of skip, except for Egypt.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I kind of ignored everything else.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like would jump way ahead to Rome and then go back to
Yeah.
classical Greece. But until recently, I've just gotten really into like the Philistines and the sea peoples and
Yeah.
like, all
Well,
Arcadia.
like one of my favorite ancient texts is like, and I actually recommend everyone read it, is the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like, it's sort of actually a very beautiful story. It's like really, really what it is a story about like mortality and friendship. If you kind of try and like, and it's very human in a lot of ways, you know, obviously it's like mythical, but like you can kind of really get the human undertones, like the real human emotions. I think it's like super interesting. Obviously it's like one of the oldest texts that we have.
And Campbell obviously refers to it as well.
Yeah.
As like the foundation of the monomyth of just
that's right. Yeah.
Earliest example of it.
And but I just like, I find that whole because so many cultures came from ancient Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
You know, like like everything from like the Assyrians to obviously the Egyptians and
Semitic people.
yeah, all the Semitic people. Like a lot of them, you find a lot of similar words and themes that can be traced back to ancient Mesopotamia. So I think it's like super interesting in terms of like our own history and stuff. So anyways, little bit of a rabbit trail, but I do recommend people just read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's not like that long.
Yeah.
You could probably couple hours.
I did
3 hours.
a ancient mythology course
Oh, did
in
you?
university, and we studied the Epic.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Anyways, I did mention this in the last episode. I thought it was interesting about the exiles and sort of like the 12 disciples. There's like 12 exiles or
religious connotations.
yeah, and they like go to this new promised land, like this mythical place, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of interesting. Also, another kind of interesting thing. I don't know. This may be a bit more of a stretch, but it's like these like deities coming down to these primitive peoples and like being gods and breeding with them is like very Nephilim, like Nephilim-esque.
For those unfamiliar, Nephilim are angels.
Yeah, I think there's scholarly debate about what the Nephilim are, but the gist is they're like angels that came from heaven and like breeded with men in the Christian Old Testament of the Torah, whatever you want to call it. They came in and like there was. After that, there's like these half human, half angel
giants.
Yeah, giants.
Hybrid creatures. Yeah. That were like, known for great feats and things. So.
Yeah, that's right. So there's almost sort of that with the Dark Lords sort of interbreeding with the Sith, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, so also what's interesting about the whole Marka Ragnos story is he never appeared. There's not a single story about him like really being alive. It's all like either someone retelling of like a memory, or him appearing as a Force ghost. There's not like an actual story just centered
about him
around Marka Ragnos, even though he's actually a particularly important Sith and he's very important in like the Sith mythos. And he's probably one of the most cited Dark Lords of the Sith in like the entire Star Wars universe. Like he is mentioned in a lot of books and a lot of comics and a lot of games. And he's really interwoven into the entire Sith mythos. And he's like very revered as like this ancient great Sith Lord, which I think is like kind of interesting. And in a lot of ways, because he's so opaque, maybe like, and I don't know, like, there's so much legend around him that almost like adds to the legend that there's not like a super clear story of him. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Where like almost a legend outlives like the and it just builds on itself, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. So also I brought up the disciples of Ragnos and the Ragnosians. Now, I will put a little bit of a caveat. I'm not so sure if the Ragnosians are certainly canon because they actually only appear in a Star Wars RPG. So they don't appear in any other material. It was just this Star Wars RPG. They were like, it was sort of a backstory they made in this RPG book. And but they like sort of lived immediately after the death of Ragnos, and they were like sort of his disciples, right?
Yeah.
The disciples of Ragnos came like after the destruction of the Death Star.
Yeah, like long after. Like after Luke has started his Jedi Academy.
Right. But the Ragnosians were more of like an accepted denomination within the ancient Sith, right? Like that's how they're presented. They're almost like, I don't know, Protestants and Catholics or something. Like it's like a.
Are you sure they were that accepted then, or
Well,
was there some early bloodshed there?
Maybe I'll say like, I don't know, Presbyterians and
Between
Lutherans or something, right? Like they're all within the branch of the Sith. They were just, but the disciples of Ragnos were more really just a cult, and even Ragnos himself, there's no evidence that he ever deified himself. He wasn't like Lord Vitiate. There's no evidence that he just wanted to have a legacy as like the great Sith king. But there was no like delusions of like deity around him. And the Ragnosians that are presented don't speak about him in deific terms. It's just more like he's like their great teacher.
And they just want to preserve his legacy.
Yeah, that's right. But the cult of Ragnos is different, where they deify him and they like
actually worship him as like religious fanatics.
That's right. And they are fanatics. But with that being said, Marka Ragnos, his spirit, didn't oppose this because he wanted them to resurrect him, right? Like, and
well, why would you stop them then?
Yeah, exactly. Even though that was doesn't seem to be anything he taught in life. But again, I could accept an argument if someone wanted to say like the Ragnosians of ancient times aren't really canon, or they shouldn't be included. Maybe.
I don't see why not. Like, I don't see them inherently conflicting.
It's just I agree that's why I decided to include it, because there wasn't any real conflict. That I could see. There wasn't any contradictions, but they are just not mentioned anywhere else. That is just, it's this one, like it's like this game book basically, right? This RPG book.
I mean, there are those cases where something is just dropped in. It never goes anywhere. It's never explored. It's almost like a dead end, which is kind of rare, more or less, for Star Wars, just because it is so expansive. Usually, some authors building off some author, and it goes down a huge rabbit trail. But other times, it is just like a one-off mention thing. Some guy came up with it, never gets brought up again. No one ever picks up that thread, and it's just there dangling, right?
Yeah.
I don't see why they shouldn't exist. Especially in the context of like being generally accepted. And even then, like, there are lots of Sith cults that like really elevate the individual who they follow.
Yeah.
And you'll see this pop up a few times throughout the canon, right? So if Ragnos' legacy really is that great, then it's not a stretch to think he has followers that would.
Absolutely. And like he unified the Sith clans, right? I mean, I guess the Dark Lords did too, but it seemed like Ragnos
took them to the next.
Yeah, he
took them into the Golden Age.
Yeah, he took exactly. He took them into the Golden Age of the Sith. He turned them into an.
Well, that isn't entirely accurate, because technically the Golden Age of the Sith starts with the Junta Paul, so it's already lasting this whole multi-thousand year period.
Oh, is that how it?
Yeah, it's weird because
I was reading it.
The Golden Age of the Sith is the title of the story of when the Sith kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
So it doesn't totally make sense. It's really the end of the Golden Age of the Sith with Marka Ragnos. So I guess the last leader of the Golden Age.
But sort of the peak, though, of the Sith.
Yeah, when it was at its biggest and strongest before they start mixing up with the Republican stuff. And now I'm going to stop because that's kind of leading into the next episode. But
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm also like, again, another source of like possibly a really cool story, or even just like a cool merch book you could buy, would be the Epistle of Ragnos, which I'm
write it like a religious text.
No, but much like the Book of Sith, right? Like, you can buy.
I own a copy of it.
Oh, do you? Yeah, exactly. Like that would be like really cool to have the Book of Ragnos, which I think probably back then was like the Sith Bible, right? Like that would have been like Ragnos really. There's a lot of emphasis on like how wise and smart he was, and like how cunning he was, and so it makes a lot of sense that he would also have like writings and stuff.
Yeah, I'd imagine it looks something like Machiavelli, the Prince.
Yeah,
it's like how to control and how to retain power and how to politic and how to.
Yeah, and so that actually brings me to my next point was, I don't know if there's any other Sith that actually died of old age, because it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are like unknown Dark Lords
here and there
who
and
died of
everywhere,
old age, but to be like the top dog Dark Lord of the Sith and
And
not
also,
be killed,
yeah, it's pretty.
is like,
Well, it's even antithetical to your like beliefs, right? Like your
That's
apprentice
true.
is supposed to off you and be more powerful, or you reign perpetually.
not at the time of Marka Ragnos. He was before.
Yeah, like the rule of two.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you could say it was just like, be king forever, right, until the day you die. But he was able to, like a very good leader, he was able to like pit his own council
Underlings,
against
yeah.
one another, right, and make sure that the balance of power always landed on him rather than
someone else.
Yeah, someone else or united front against him, right? And so I think that in and of itself is like very impressive. And makes him almost more impressive than maybe any other Sith that came after, because he never was killed, and he was like very revered when he died. It was like there's like wailing and mourning and sackcloth and ashes after his death. He had this like huge crazy funeral, right? So like
But is it like a North Korean funeral?
it's hard to say. I don't know.
No, I bet, again, just from what we know, like because of his legacy, I'm sure he was like, it was genuine mourning.
Yeah, I think so. I like he was also like a philosopher king, it seems like, so I think people also, he was very important in shaping
the culture and
the thought of the Sith. So that's why I wish there was more. And I think it would be like a really interesting opening if ever there was like more material, or if just fan fiction, even if there's like
anyone wants to send us some good fan fiction,
some sweet fan fiction of like the philosophy of Marka Ragnos, like this like ancient Aristotle figure,
but all his teachings are very like wise, but like kind of dark.
But I would like it, like he was, and it does say he was pretty ruthless with his enemies.
Yeah,
but even that was like strategic. He didn't do it because he was sadistic.
He enjoyed cruelty.
Yeah, I think he did it. If I had to guess, this is just a guess, he did it because he wanted to ensure that there was no slave revolt or
it was
people
practical.
Conquered peoples that would come back, and that was like, it was more of a pragmatic decision than like anything like he was intentionally
out of malice.
I think he was definitely capable of being cruel, as we've seen with his pet Terentatek, but I think he was also very strategic. Everything.
Even that, like he only tortured it to make it more.
That's right.
It was for a practical purpose to have like an attack dog, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he like in a lot of ways he was kind of like a wise person. So, anyways, that's kind of the gist of Marka Ragnos, and I think there's. Like I said, there isn't a whole lot of stuff. It's kind of hard to write about him. His name is dropped quite a bit in like almost every era after him, and like
I was looking forward to this episode because I knew his name from so many other things. I'm like, oh, this guy keeps popping up everywhere. He must be important and have some kind of backstory.
Yeah. So
it's actually kind of surprising to get here and be like, huh. All the stuff you encountered was all the stuff that there is.
Yeah, pretty much. But I like the character. He does sort of, I believe he appears in like, he has like, obviously in the Jedi Academy games, he has like actual dialogue, and then in the, I believe in the Knights of the Old Republic Online, which I haven't actually played, but there's like clips of him on YouTube talking. It's a little like, it seems like a generic Dark Lord baddie kind of dialogue. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem all that interesting. I think there could be a lot more done with that character than what is like presented in his actual like speaking lines. But nonetheless, I think it is like an interesting character. He is like very important in the entire Sith mythos. Obviously, like even Darth Plagueis talks about him, and then actually in the Book of Sith, in like the because Sidious writes down his notes in the
Yeah.
Book of Sith, and he actually talks about Marka Ragnos a little bit as well. So there's like the he even though it's very minor, he does play a role in the characters of the films. So yeah. Anyways, pretty cool. Anything else to add?
No, yeah, like you were saying, just one of those characters whose tendrils are everywhere, but
Yeah.
he himself is kind of mysterious, which I also am not opposed to. I mean, now that kind of Legends is done, it's kind of like within the sealed universe. It's just the way it is now, and I think it could be cool to just leave that era of mystique around him.
It
Aura.
could be.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if like Disney never bought Star Wars. I wouldn't be surprised if they had planned on like doing more stuff with his character.
With his character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was probably just something they never got around to. So
Yeah.
anyways, I think that's all for this episode. Peace.